So, what is a fusion center?
A fusion center takes information from national and international sources and from local sources on events that could potentially threaten the security of the country. And people in the fusion center decide whether there is anything there that really warrants being passed on to anybody else. So the fusion occurs where all this information comes together. The 9/11 Commission said that basically there was no ability before fusion centers were created for law enforcement agencies in particular to share information with each other. And that's what a fusion center does, is that it takes information from law enforcement agencies and analyzes it and determines what to do with it.
Okay. What type of information does the CIAC collect?
There's a lot of information that comes in that are just citizen reports on weird things that are happening. I'll give you an example. Last September, when the Zazie case came to light, and he was the guy who was living in Aurora, and there was a guy who was living in Aurora who acquired. Well, let me put it this way. The FBI learned that he had plans and acquired some materials to create a bomb that he intended to use in New York City subways. And when the information on that story broke, we had people who called in and said, you know, I saw this guy buy a whole bunch of chemicals in our business. And that information was used to build the case against him, and he eventually pled guilty. Initially, he said, you know, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm a loyal, upstanding person, and I wouldn't do anything like that. Well, he wound up pleading guilty because there was good evidence that was presented against him. And that evidence came in large part because citizens filed a report. Now, it's different from people just, in the past, if somebody saw something strange, and they called a local law enforcement agency, a police department, for example, police departments wouldn't know what to do with that information. They would have to decide whether or not it warranted further investigation, whether or not they had the resources to do anything with it, whether or not there was a threat, an immediate threat to somebody's safety. Right now, that is the role of the Fusion Center, is to make those decisions. So they get these reports that aren't of an immediate nature. They're just weird things that people spot. And they make a determination whether something should be taken any further.
Okay, so then would a citizen who reports something like, I know one of the suspicious activity report things is taking pictures of a building with no apparent aesthetic value or something like that. Would a citizen report be considered a suspicious activity report, or would it have to come from law enforcement to be a scholar?
Well, no, a citizen report could be considered a suspicious incident report. They're not declared suspicious incidents until after somebody checks it.
Okay.
But what we've advised people consistently ever since we started the Fusion Center is that if you see somebody taking pictures of, like a tourist, of a downtown building, there's probably nothing of any interest to law enforcement there. But if they start taking pictures of security features, like where a guard station is located, where a power facility is located, things that tourists wouldn't take pictures of, there's got to be some reason why somebody's doing that. And we try to inform people that if you see something like that going on, report it, and we'll decide whether or not there's a pattern that exists. If somebody of the same description is seen taking pictures of the same kind of facility somewhere else.
Okay, so that's how you investigate it. You try to match it up to another suspicious activity report.
Right.
Okay.
Patterns.
Okay. Let's see. Is there a type of information that the CIAC specializes in? Like, I know we've got a fusion center in Texas that specializes in gang information.
No, they don't specialize in anything particular.
Okay. It's just...
In fact, they were started with the notion that they would be an all-hazards kind of fusion center, which means if we had a forest fire and somebody saw somebody with flammable materials, somebody messing around with stuff that they shouldn't be messing around with in that vicinity, the Fusion Center could really help associate those reports with what went on and help with the investigation.
How about something like a salmonella outbreak? Do you have the capabilities to track? I know. Let's see. What was it that I forget which fusion center it was that tracked through the shopping records of a local grocery store how like it came from peanut butter or something like that. Do you have the capabilities to do that right now?
No, not really. But that doesn't mean the state doesn't have the capabilities. The state health department would do something like that. There are pretty clearly defined rules for each of these operations.
Yeah.
They don't usually get involved in anything like that.
Okay. So then, what agencies do you share information with?
All local law enforcement agencies, the owners of what we call critical infrastructure, which would be things like power generation owners, transportation facilities, whether it be RTD or airlines, banking facilities, schools, another big one. Anybody who owns anything that is sort of important to people in general.
Yeah.
And then likewise, information that comes from national sources like the FBI or other kinds of organizations that operate using international channels. That information can filter through them and they can distribute it out to local agencies. So it's this.
So I'm assuming you work with the FBI pretty
Yes.
often. Does the information usually come down from the FBI to you, or from you to the FBI, or is it a pretty even back and forth?
It's all of what you described. It's both back and forth.
Okay. And what is your relationship with the Joint Terrorism Task Force?
The JTTF is a member of our Fusion Center, of our CIAC. And the JTTF is it's a task force that is established by the FBI. And by federal law, anything that appears to be a potential terrorist act must be turned over to the FBI for further investigation. Our folks don't do that. It's done by the feds, by the FBI.
Yeah.
And so because they're